So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it's been a while since we've actually seen Thranduil's halls, which is weird because at one time it was the map that I had effectively most overused, but it's been such a long time since we've seen it. I think I'm actually quite glad to see Thranduil's halls again, which is nice because it is a very well crafted siege map. You see here a very nice defensive position with a lot of raised terrain to use your skirmishers on, and the enemy armies will cross over the river and have to choose between three distinct choke points. The central one, which is on regular sort of flat terrain, and then the other two which are up hills, which, I don't know, I think this one over here is probably the best one to attack, generally speaking, on Thranduil's halls, but we shall see how the attackers decide to handle things, because it is effectively a lore-friendly battle. I mean, it is certainly good versus evil. Three orcish factions, Angmar, Mordor and Isengard on the attack, so a good mix there. Mirkwood themselves fighting on home terrain, just as Cardolan were in the last battle replay, but they are going to be joined by Numenor. I wonder what would have brought Numenor this far north, but here they are, and they will be standing against the Orc menace as well. But, as per the usual, we will be going through the attacking armies first and foremost, starting off with Angmar, played by Angmar, and he's got some Angmar marauders. When you're on the attack, especially when you outnumber the enemy, you're going to have to make compromises in some part of your army, especially as the Orcs, but being the Orcs means you do often have access to very cheap units such as this. So Angmar Marauders are obviously going to really struggle, especially against the melee defense of the Mirkwood units, I would suggest. However, they're really just here for numbers. They can absorb punishment, whether it be in melee or at range, and that is really going to be their whole reason for being. I do like the look of the Angmar Marauders as well, like the sort of patchwork nature of them, and the furs that they wear, indicating that they are indeed from the north. And then the slightly bulkier cousin to them, the Gondor Guard, albeit they bear more in common with the higher tier line infantry unit that Angmar often traffic in. Gondor Guard will be good for pushing through lines potentially. Obviously Angmar do have a better unit for that, but heavy spears do a decent job of that when you put them into shield wall. They'll also keep themselves alive quite a long time. They can keep an assault going for a little bit longer, even if their damage values lag behind a little bit. Also though, the Gondor Guard will be good at zoning out any sort of cavalry sally-outs that may be on the defence. Mirkwood and Numenor can do that. Indeed, I think I did see a cavalry unit from Numenor in particular, so that can be quite useful. We shall see if that comes to pass. Upgraded Witcher-armed pikemen. I said in the last replay that if you are going to upgrade the armour on units, the Witcher-armed pikemen should probably be your lowest priority, because even if you upgrade their armour, higher tier skirmishers, especially the ones that the elves and Numenor both traffic in, are still going to be able to punch right on through the upgraded armour and kill them anyway. The lack of a shield is what really does them in. However, if you do have the money to upgrade them, it is still useful. It will still boost their effectiveness, it'll make them stronger at dealing with basic projectiles, and it will also make them a little bit tougher when they actually do get hit in melee. But the main attraction for a pike unit like this is the fact that they are pikes. They will be able to hold enemy units at bay, and indeed Mirkwood do not have any phalanx units of any kind. Numenor do, but their basic pike unit is not as good as the Witcher-armed pikemen, and their higher tier pike unit, you're only likely to see one of them in a battle. So I think a very good choice there. In behind, we have some upgraded Guardians of Cardolan as well. Definitely a very defensive line infantry unit, as a lot of Angmar's units tend to be. They're very aggressive, but they do so with their heft more so than their actual damage. And the Guardians of Cardolan really typify this, because as far as a line infantry unit goes, they're kind of similar to something like the Uruk-hai infantry or the Serpent Guard from Harad, that sort of thing, but they trade in the extra damage that those units tend to have for being even bulkier, especially when you upgrade their armour like this. They're a very good unit, honestly. They're right up my street in terms of the kind of units that I like to use, but we'll see how well they do this time. They should be a good pick though, because they can absorb punishment at range and they can keep an attack going for a long period of time on the front line. Trolls of Gondor, useful for all the reasons you would expect, especially if you get into like a Numenor pike block. They're going to do a lot of damage there, but do bear in mind that both Numenor and Mirkwood both have got some good heavy swordsmen that can be used to really burn these guys down pretty quickly, so you do need to be quite careful with a unit such as this. Here are the Blackwatch Legion, useful for pushing through lines even more so than the spears in front of them, most certainly. The elves as well, with their lower unit counts, are a little bit more susceptible to this potentially, but also the elves are going to do more damage to the Blackwatch Legion, and they're not brilliant at keeping themselves alive. In spite of the fact that they do look like real juggernauts, they're actually not that great in melee. They're decent, don't get me wrong, but don't expect them to be world beaters. When they do push themselves through the line, they could often isolate themselves, and against the elves of Mirkwood that could be absolutely dire for them. And then we have the Witcher-armed Blackguard, a really strong bodyguard tier unit, sword and board. That's where the general is going to be really strong. Mirkwood and Numenor both have units which can outperform them in melee, which is not that common, to be fair. The Blackguard are one of the better bodyguard units that you'll see, at least of this type. But both Numenor and Mirkwood have got the kind of units that can go toe-to-toe with them fairly simply. And some Witch Realm Scare Traders, which will be really useful for breaking up the front lines, both against the more lightly armoured Mirkwood troops and against potential Numenor Phalanxes with their throwing axes. And as we've seen recently, they're somewhat decent in melee as well, albeit against factions of the quality of Numenor and Mirkwood. That might be a little bit different. We shall have to wait and see. Now then, we shall move on to Mordor, played by Joran, who is the one who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. He's got some Minas Morgul chosen, heavily armoured spears. Useful for Mordor. You don't see them as much as you used to, which is a little bit strange, because they perform much the same role as the Gundabad Guard do over in Angmar, only they do it sort of exclusively for Mordor, whereas Angmar have got the Guardians of Khan Doom as well. Mordor only have the Minas Morgul chosen, and they are better, I would say, than the Gundabad Guard as well. Very useful for keeping your front line alive and ticking over quite nicely, because if you have nothing but lower tier units on the front line, you can often find yourself in a bit of a bind. But we shall see how they do on this occasion. Orc Javelins will be useful just because of how cheap they are. We've said several times at this point that cheap skirmishers in general, but Javelins especially, because once they get into range they can actually do some decent damage quite quickly. They're a real conundrum for defenders to have to deal with, because using ammunition on them will seem like a waste because of how cheap they are, but if you let them do their thing, they're going to rack up a decent kill count, which is even worse. So potentially cavalry sally-outs are the best way to deal with a unit like this, but if Mordor are prepared for that as well, it'll be a little bit difficult for the defenders, and it'll be a puzzle for them to have to work through. Rhun infantry, a very basic unit of line infantry. They are just going to be here for their numbers. Naturally, they're not going to be able to outperform really anything from Numenor or Mirkwood, but they are still here, and you can see Joran already getting his Nazgul in and amongst them. This is one of the best places you can put Nazgul, because Moran infantry have plenty of numbers that you can put around a unit that is so strong. The Nazgul individually, of course, are really monstrous, but there are only so many of them, so we shall see how effective they can be, but it looks as though Joran's got the right idea. In behind them, we've got some upgraded Orc Maulers. Interesting to see the armour upgrade on the Orc Maulers, because the benefit they actually get from it is going to be fairly limited. It will make them slightly more survivable, but we'll see. They'll be more useful by far against Numenor, because Numenor actually do pack on that Numenorian plate armour. Whereas Mirkwood, while their armour values can be okay if they upgrade their armour, their melee defense is going to be the real problem for a unit like the Orc Maulers. So we'll see how well Joran uses them as well. And then over on the other side of this little area, we have more Minas Morguls chosen and more Orc Javelins. 3 units of Orc Javelins, in fact, and plenty of Moran infantry as well. So he's got a core of cheap Javelins and entry-level line infantry, and then he's got some bulkier spears to put on the front line. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, which are slightly worse individually than the Blackwatch Legion, but you can bring 2 before the price increases, which is what Joran has done, so he's got plenty of pushing power through those lines. But even more so in this case, they are somewhat fragile, more fragile perhaps than you would expect to look at them. So do take care, but if you use them at the right time, they can be the sort of thing which can really win a siege battle for you. Olag Kai, better individually than the Angmar Trolls, although Angmar you often see them bring 2 units of Trolls, not on this occasion though, just the 1, which is quite refreshing to see. But the Olag Kai, again, it's all about timing when you use units like the Great Shield Infantry and the Trolls. If you use them at the wrong time, they're going to get burnt down very, very quickly. If you use them at the right time, however, they can cause the front line to collapse. And then some upgraded Temple Executioners, which is where the General's Bodyguard, well, is going to be the General's Bodyguard on this occasion. One of the units in the Mordor roster which can actually go toe-to-toe with a lot of what Numenor and Mirkwood have to offer, albeit, I would say, the really high-tier, high-damage Bodyguard infantry unit that both Numenor and Mirkwood have could probably take on the Temple Executioners and win. Certainly the Pharazim Swordmasters could, and I believe the Palace Guard could defeat the upgraded Temple Executioners as well because of their AP. And finally, we have Explain, who is playing as Isengard. He's got the Nazkai, a mighty unit of armour-piercing bodyguard infantry. I think this is the General's Bodyguard. It could be, although maybe not. Very, very strong though. Again, more useful against Numenor, but because of their high stats, they will still be useful against a lot of the Mirkwood units as well. On this kind of map, I was surprised to not see any siege up until this point, but Isengard have brought their ballista. If you park it on this side of the river, there are plenty of good shots you can get over to the other side, which is why it's such a good idea to bring this on this map. Trolls the White Hand, very similar to the armoured trolls we've seen already from the other 2 factions. Dunlending Clansmen, a unit of militia spears that have a slightly higher anti-cavalry bonus than is average, so they could be quite useful for zoning out enemy cavalry as well, but otherwise they're just going to be very similar to something like the Orc Fodder. Uruk-hai Pikemen, similar to the Witch Realm Pikemen as well, only Isengard can bring them in far greater numbers than Angmar can, so you often see it be more of a staple of the Isengard army, as perhaps you would expect. Probably best used later on in the battle. as with most pikes, because otherwise the Numenor and Mirkwood skirmishers are probably going to do horrendous damage to them, but we shall have to wait and see. There's no other units in there, just more pikes. There is Uruk-hai infantry, as you would expect, so if you compare them to the Guardians of Cardolan, they're going to do a little bit more damage, but because armour upgrades and so on and so forth, they are a bit more fragile than the Guardians of Cardolan when they're fully kitted out. But it's not much. Honestly, as a unit, I do prefer the Uruk-hai infantry because they're a little bit more well-balanced and they do fit into Isengard's strategies. Well, to be fair, the Guardians of Cardolan fit into Angmar's strategies perfectly as well, but for me, I do prefer the Uruk-hai infantry, but it just kind of depends on what you're looking for. And then over here, Uruk-hai Berserkers, need to be quite careful with them. They could be really effective with their 3 HP, but unlike the Pharazim Swordmasters, they don't have any other defensive stats really. They've got like no armour, really no defensive skill at all either, so they're all about those 3 hit points, and once they are gone, they are done, or will be done very soon. But they can kick out a lot of damage before that time comes, so we shall see if that proves to be the case. And Uruk-hai Crossbows, they do have a good amount of punch at range as well. We haven't seen that many skirmishers, to be honest. We saw some javelins from the orcs, but other than these crossbows, not really any long-range stuff. So the attackers are going to have to be hyper-aggressive, you would have thought, to actually get any sort of success in this battle. So there is a unit back over here that we shall tackle first of all, which is some Woodland Round Patrol, which is over here. So Mirkwood, played by the Dog Eater, interesting name. Mirkwood playing on home soil. Got some Woodland Round Patrol back over here, which I assume was just he just forgot to move. We've got some Hiri Lung, which do have the armour upgrade. When you're facing a force and you're outnumbered, generally speaking, the armour upgrades are going to be a little bit more easy for you to afford. Hiri Auth, which are a fantastic unit of line infantry as well. Good shield value actually, and with the armour upgrade from the front, they can actually be pretty durable. But do bear in mind that Mirkwood, they're all about the melee defense really more so than the armour. Spears of Amenduia, which especially in shield wall can provide a little bit of mass to the front line as far as entry spears go as well. They're going to perform pretty well in melee, but they are fairly lightweight, so do bear that in mind. More Spears of Amenduia back there. More upgraded Hiri Auth. Up on the top here we've got some upgraded Hiri Ek, which are the most defensive really of all of the Mirkwood heavy units, because they've got a really good shield value, and just being spears in general means they're a little bit better when they're more defensively used. But a fantastic unit nonetheless. More upgraded Hiri Auth, more upgraded Hiri Lung, more upgraded Hiri Ek. So when you're in this situation, it does make sense to go for a lot of the heavier units, because it's not as if you can hide and catch your opponent unawares. He's also upgraded his Elven King's Palace Guard, a truly scary unit. A real fan favourite as always. Interesting to see the Elders of the Elven King here as well with Thranduil. Their Silverthorns could be really good for breaking up those advances. I'm quite surprised actually to see the Hiri Peng are one of the units that don't have the armour upgrade, but perhaps he's counting on the fact that it's unlikely, or would be unlikely, that he would be counter-skirmished in a map where the terrain is so favourable to the defenders. And he's actually right to do this, because none of the attacking armies really have that much in the way of archers, if anything at all. So he's actually played a bit of a blinder by using all of his armour upgrades on his infantry, where it'll be a little bit more useful. He's also got the Ents, which act as Mirkwood's variant of the Trolls, really. Very, very tanky. Well, not tanky as such, but very, very damaging if you use them at the right time. And a Catapult. Interesting to see that. If they can use that at the right time, it could be really devastating as well. And then Casper Hake, who's playing as Numenor. Naru Naaru Royal Guard, really good in a skirmish fight, albeit that's not going to be too much of a concern this time. They're just going to be there for doing damage over a long period of time and then being heavy spears in melee. Belagire Archers will do damage on the approach as well. Down here in the central choke point, Belagire Footmen, really the cheap option if you want to form some sort of basic line as Numenor, because a lot of their units do tend to be quite expensive, as you would expect. More Belagire Footmen, Numenorian Cohort for example, comparing them to the Hiri Auth. Hiri Auth are a little bit better in terms of melee defense and such. Numenorian Cohort have got obviously the better armour, but both of them are actually more damage focused than your average line infantry unit of this cost, so quite interesting there. More Numenorian Cohort. The mighty Pharazim Swordmaster is the best unit of bodyguard infantry in the game if it comes to when it comes to dealing damage, because that 3 HP as well as the really high stats they have is such a game changer. That extra HP really does make all the difference. Seafarers of Nindamos, very good javelins as well as being medium axe infantry in melee. Very important unit are going to be the Naru Naaru Sentinels because of all the pikes that are on the field today. Back over here we have some Numenorian Cohort, and then also we have a couple of units of Numenorian Shield Guard armour piercing spears, which will be useful against all of the attacking factions today, especially I would say, well actually no, all of them generally, because even the Mordor forces rely on their armour, even though they're not quite as heavily armoured as the others. Belagaya Pikes, Numenorean Shield Guard, the Royal Legion of Armenelos, a really good unit, a bodyguard, sword and board unit, and this is a unit I would say is superior to the Woodround Blackguard as well. And over here, no archers up on that side over there actually. Finally, we have some Belagaya footmen as well. So, without further ado, let's begin. Bit of an extended look there. I haven't made one of my openings that long in quite a while. Maybe it's just the feeling of being back on Thranduil's halls again. And there goes the frames. Always an interesting little frame dip at the start of these battles, generally speaking, but not an overly long battle, I would have to say. I would assume, based on the frames, that this battle is going to be fought and won in the first defence. I would assume we're not actually going to go back to the halls themselves on this occasion, unless the defenders retreat very quickly. And this battle, I think, is going to be shaped by the fact that the attackers can't really engage in any sort of elongated skirmishing, because Mordor certainly don't have the archers to do so. I would assume that Angmar don't either. Some Orc Fellas have revealed themselves, which are very, very fragile, but the armour piercing could be useful, especially against Numenor. Extra damage as well. Unless Isengard had brought some of their Uruk-hai archers and they were hidden in the trees, but Uruk-hai archers are not really as good, even for the Orc purposes, because they don't have the same numbers. And you can't really skirmish with crossbows either, because they'll have to get way closer, and the defenders will easily make the choice of trying to skirmish them down. Belagaya archers are up there. Mordor going to rush forwards. Mordor probably going to be the first wave, and I would say Minas Morgul chosen at the centre of a horde of Morannon infantry is not the worst of the first waves, and then it will be up to Isengard and Angmar to pick up the slack. And oftentimes you see the attackers prioritise one choke point over the other. This is the biggest one, and the one you can support more easily with artillery, so it'll be interesting to see what they do with their artillery on this occasion, Isengard. They can skirmish, I suppose, with that, but they can only do that in a limited capacity. They can't really go after the archers that are up here, because the fortification, interestingly enough, will actually block a lot of the ballista shots. I'm not sure why the... something that's been happening over the last couple of battle replays. It opens up with some juddering frames. A little bit more understandable in the Hobbit ambush battle because of the sheer number of unit models that were on the field at the time. There are some Eerie out in the background. I mean, they've got enough heavy units here, Mirkwood, to be getting on with to start. Mordor going to be moving forward, testing the waters here. And so far, Numenor could be opening up with their one unit of Belagaya archers they've got up here. But so far they aren't, and indeed they are going to reposition themselves first before they decide to start attacking. What have we got back down here? Minas Morgul's chosen. Interesting that they aren't being... Well, I suppose there's no point in shooting them with basic archers because of their heavy armour and shields, but I admire the restraint of the defenders here. They know, because there's no attacking archers moving forward first, that they can afford to pick and choose their targets at will. Which is one of the reasons why I say that as the attackers you should always bring at least some, even just cheap archers, because it will give the defenders something to think about, and in this sort of situation I think that would really help the attackers. But those unit slots that would have been taken up by archers have now instead been taken up by other units of infantry and the like, so swings and roundabouts, that extra strength they've got in melee could prove to be a bit of a difference maker. Isengard Ballista still not being utilised at the moment. Orc Javelins. Horns blaring, but no actual combat so far. Ah, we do have some shots coming in now. Wooden Realm Troll. Elders of the Elven King are firing. At what would be my question. They are firing into the Nazgul. So the Nazgul have been seen, and the problem is the Nazgul are actually going to struggle to get out of this situation now, because those Silverthorn arrows will tend to knock units over, so they could get effectively stun-locked here if they aren't careful. Also, ever since I switched to Shader version 2, it could be that the shadow map like this are playing havoc with it because of how many trees there are on it. Still, the right sort of targets to go after, to be fair. Oof, that frame though. Hopefully this does clear up as the battle goes on, as has been the usual recently, because it's a little bit unfortunate. Orc Maulers are there. And the Belagair archers are now opening up as well. On what, I wonder? Orc maulers by by the look of things. Again, a good target. The armour upgrade will help them a little bit in this sort of situation, but not enough to save them from consistent damage from any sort of archer, really. Meanwhile, I'm surprised these javelins haven't been utilised as of yet. And a small group chosen there. The Elders of the Elven King have been moved back for the time being, and I believe picking up the slack going to be this unit of Woodland Realm Patrol. To say, seeing as I haven't actually seen these two names before, maybe I've seen Casper Hake, although it would have been a long time ago at this point. The restraint they have on their skirmishers is actually interesting. Rhun infantry moving forward. Rhun infantry will trade fairly well actually with the Belagair footmen. It won't be, unlike most matchups on the field today, the Rhun infantry won't get absolutely rolled by the unit they're facing in melee, but the Belagair footmen are good at holding a line, especially with the armour upgrades as they have here. But a little bit of support wouldn't go amiss for them, especially with the other support coming in. And indeed, there is actually some support across the way. The Woodland Realm Patrol are going to be shooting into the backs of these units. The Orc Maulers with the armour upgrade will actually be a bit of a difference maker there, because they will do a decent amount of damage if they can push themselves to the front and get into melee. As the Woodland Realm Patrol continue to shoot. What are they firing at now, I wonder? More Orc Maulers that are in loose formation. But Elven accuracy means that the loose formation is not quite the useful tool that you would imagine it to be. Numenorian Shield Guard could push their way onto the front line. You can see here the combination of Orcish line infantry and shock infantry is, for the time being, not having the desired effect, much like the frame rate. But if those armour-piercing spears were to push forward, that would change matters considerably. That Moran-on armour that they are wearing will not save them from some good old-fashioned Numenorian elbow grease with those spears. Too much of the too many of the orcs are still back over there. The orcs do start off with a somewhat natural advantage in a situation like this. Orc javelins, I don't think they have the right firing arc. Maybe they do. We'll see now, I suppose, as those Numenorian Shield Guard did push their way onto the front line to meet the Mordor orcs. It's looking like they're not gonna. Like that's not going to work. I mean, some of those Numenorian Shield Guard are on the front line. I would move them forward if I were Casper Hake, because while these orcs are shaking, I guess I wasn't giving enough credit to the Belagair footman. But you could finish off this little force much more quickly with a bit of armour piercing added in for good measure. And you aren't going to lose too many. The Orc Maulers might snag a few, but ultimately that's going to be something you're going to have to contend with at some stage. Numenor's still just hanging out. The Trolls of the White Hand are across the river at this point. A large amount of orcs are now moving across, as well as some Dunders, but again, it's nothing too impressive. Angmar Marauders and Orc Fellas are Angmar really a bit of a token effort in terms of the quality of units that they're sending forward. But we'll see if this approach does work, because I would assume that at some stage they're just going to throw everything in based on how long this battle is. Orc Maulers and Moran infantry still fighting, and they're doing better now. The more that these Belagair footmen that are in formation they kill off, the more of a potential advantage they have. But efficient engagement this from the Belagair footmen so far, which is pretty interesting. More Moran units pushing forward, focusing on a singular choke point so far, which I think is a mistake. Very often it's a mistake. Greenwood Rangers, what are they firing at? I'm not sure if they have the best of shots. Well, I mean, these Minas Morgul Chosen are so densely packed that you could justify using the Greenwood Rangers, I suppose. But I would urge restraint with the Rangers, especially, until the main force comes forward. Angmar have sent their trolls up as well. Are they going to start attacking over here? It does look as though they will. Angmar going to take the lead over here where Mordor did on the other side. But you're going to need something more than Angmar Marauders to take on Mirkwood units. The Trolls of Gundabad are all well and good, but they are a flash-in-the-pan type of unit. We'll see how well those Orc Fellas can do as well. There are the Olak High, biding their time and waiting. Now here come the heavier Numenorian units, and this will well and truly shut the door on this Mordor assault. The Nazgûl are in here now, slightly bloody from the few volleys that those Elders of the Elven King gave to them. Is that a rout as well? Those Moran on infantry. The Nazgul that are fighting on the front line won't be too happy that their underlings are routing. Hiri Lang were thinking about going onto the front line, but for the time being, that is not necessary. I think they're seeing as well the beginning of the assault. Angmar marauders charging into melee against the Elven spear line. Orc fellas moving in as well. The elves closing the jaws now on the Angmarim that they perceive. And that armour piercing is not going to be all that useful against the entry-level Mirkwood units. Or come the Ents. I mean, they will be somewhat useful against the Ents. But I suppose the quality of the unit is such that you could break them pretty quickly, especially with those fire arrows that are coming in now. But already the Ents getting a little bit bloody. Will the Angmarim rout? Possibly. They're already looking like they could. This is the danger of having only basic units. Ooh, and there is the Isengard Ballista firing across. Oh, and they do get a good hit there into some Hiri Alth. I mean, this is the right side of the battlefield to be using the Isengard Ballista on, because it's much more open. So you could get a decent amount of damage done here to Mirkwood. And we shall see if that continues. Cavalry sally out as well from the Pharazim Nobles. Let's just go down to half speed for just a moment, because everything is happening all at once all of a sudden. Pharazim Nobles charging into the Angmar Marauders with all of the spears they've got on hand. They really should be leading the way, I think, with the Dunlending Clansmen. Javelin fire coming in as well. Pharazim Nobles should pick their moments to charge. That was a good moment, but they should retreat now and save another charge for later. Potentially, even if the defensive lines break, they could be somewhat useful. This front line over here, still the Nazgul are fighting on the front line. How many of them are remaining? If we can actually get into one and see how many of them are remaining, that would be something. I would assume not that many, because I think the Greenwood Rangers are targeting this front line over here as well. So bad times for Mordor. This front line, this is probably the hardest front line to take, because it's at the top of the hill and it's very narrow. So I'm surprised that that was the one that was identified as the one that we absolutely should be going for, with the Realm Patroller there. Angmarim continuing to try and go up the hill. Here the Ents are now going to retreat, get out of swinging range of those axes. Let's go back up to 1 speed. But yeah, routing is not too surprising, and this is why you should always, even if it's the initial assault and you know it's going to be fairly painful, you should always have some unit of quality on the front line, just to keep everything ticking over quite nicely. Even something like the Gundabad Guard would have been something that would have kept this assault going for a little bit longer. Orc Javelins are moving in as well, so they're going to try and use their skirmishing tools, and that is good damage done there to the Wooden Realm Patrol, in all fairness, by the Isengard Ballista. And they are now going to try to use some Orc Javelins, so while they don't have, and some Snaga Skirmishers actually from Isengard, while they don't have any archers as such, they're still going to be using their range to their advantage. Javelin boys. And in come the Ents. The Ents are going to go behind enemy lines, and they are going to do big damage to the Orc Javelins, because they're not really going to be doing much in return in melee. Isengard are on the front line as well, Uruk-hai infantry pushing forward. Eventually this basic Mirkwood front line should falter, especially with a bit of support coming in from the Javelins, but the damage done to some key targets could be fairly substantial here. What have we got here? More Orc Javelins. They're going to be doing the business as well against these Belagaya footmen. So Joran, he invested heavily into a few units of Orc Javelins, and so far he's used them quite well. But the main body of his army is still engaged in a real ground war up here, though now he's being aggressive with his Olag High. He's sent forward a unit of Minas Morgul chosen as well, so now it's not just Nazgul surrounded by rubbish. He is sending forward good units, and honestly, it might be a good moment to send forward the Blackguard of Barad-dûr as well, because this could become a bit of a watershed moment in this fight. The Olag High will eventually start to falter in the face of the Royal Legion and the more damaging Hiri Lang. They'll do damage in return, of course, but Seafarers of Nindamos are here. Belagaya Pikes and Numenorian cohort are getting ready to patch the holes, and the Numenorian cohort's damage is such that the Olag High will eventually falter to them as well. It's just how much damage they can do before they fall. Minas Morgul chosen backing things up, routing Orc Maulers. They're going to need some more basic units to come forward as well, if they have any left. Those Belagaya footmen are just getting absolutely hounded by those Orc Javelins. Mordor will be very pleased about that. In come some trolls, both the Gundabad and the Isengard trolls. In one blob, Javelins being used on the Elven front line, arrows being used on the Orc front line. And the Hiri Alth are starting to struggle, and using just hyper-aggression here, I think, is the way to go for the attackers. And I wonder... There are Uruk-hai pikes on the front line who are taking horrid damage, to be fair, at the hands of, I think, the Greenwood Rangers. So this front line is going to take a lot of damage, but the Trolls are going to be enough to batter their way through. 2 units of heavy Trolls like this. Mirkwood are going to have to send more forward if they want to hold on to this front line, and indeed they will. Unit of Hiri-Alth. Elven infantry like this will be enough to bring down Trolls eventually, but it's what's following the Trolls which is going to concern Mirkwood, because if they start to get driven back, it's going to be pretty hairy for them. Hiri-Lang are moving forward, also the Palace Guard. Now the Palace Guard will be a problem for the Trolls. The armor piercing and the high damage values that they have going to be far too great for them. Now pushing through this middle choke point as well, Mordor, after really depleting that unit of Balagaya footman. Mordor are going to start to test the waters here, and that unit of Morannon infantry, they're exhausted, interestingly enough. 37 of them. There are some fresh ones on the front line as well, but they're going to need to reinforce this front line, especially with some Witch Realm pikemen pushing their way up to the front line as well. So Mirkwood and Numenor at this point really being put under the cosh as Mordor continue to try and push forward. I mean, progress is being made by Mordor, but they're going to need more reinforcements to keep this assault going at some stage. And I'm not sure whether they can afford to do that now they're pushing through the middle as well, but perhaps they only need one of these choke points to fall, and then, like dominoes, so should the rest. I mean, Balagaya pikes are having to be pushed forward, which is not really the best answer to Trolls. They don't really do the damage, but at this point the Trolls are damaged enough to the point where it might be enough to tip them over the edge. Still those Royal Legion as well, which is still relatively healthy. They're mostly fighting the Mordor infantry though. There comes some Morannon infantry to try and keep this attack going. Mordor taking the lead on 2 of the choke points. You have to wonder how much punishment their army can truly take. Hiri-Lang and Hiri-Alth trying to do good damage here against the Orc infantry, but Uruk-hai infantry and pikes made of sterner stuff than most Orcs. And there are also Trolls in and amongst their ranks as well, but where do those Palace Guard go? The Palace Guard are in here. That should be the end of the Trolls. You can see there's one dead Troll on the floor there. Woodland Realm Patrol out of ammunition, sent into melee, only 40 of them remain, but every little helps on this front line. I'm surprised there's actually still Orc fellas fighting on the front line, if I'm being honest, but fair play to them. Probably not for much longer. And here comes some Hiri-Ak as well. Ooh, and here come the Blackwatch Legion. That's why the Hiri-Ak are being committed, I would assume. But the Trolls are mostly gone at this point, and the Blackwatch Legion are pushing through Palace Guard, which this will do a lot of damage to them on the way through. I do wonder if this actually will pay off for them, or whether it will blow up in their face as they shunt their way through. Their armour as well, not going to be too useful against armour piercing. Uruk-hai infantry at this point are very depleted, so they're going to need to follow through that with that push with a unit of infantry. The Scourge Raiders have been decimated, really. Those Orc Javelins as well are getting peppered up by, I think, they're getting tossed around all over the place, which leads me to believe the Elders of the Elven King are firing at them, and that could be them over there. But when you push through a line like this, you need a unit to consolidate that, and they don't really have that at this point, and they've revealed themselves for a cavalry charge. Fortunately for them it is melee cavalry, but Mirkwood will hold on for, well, I don't know about that actually. Mordor are pushing forward. They really are focusing down this front line at this point, with Mordor also bringing their mass pushing units over here. If they send infantry to follow through on that assault, it could be a real messy situation that they then have to deal with. Orc Javelins and Witch Realm Pikemen, so the other 2 front lines at this point becoming more of a distraction measure. Blackguard of Barad-dûr pushing forward over here, but I don't think it's going to pay off for them over here as much as it will on the other side, because it's just Mordor over here, whereas Mordor helping out with a push of Angmar and Isengard on the other side. But the Blackguard are making this front line lose cohesion, which is useful against something like the Naru Sentinels. And there are also Temple Executioners in here as well, so they'll offer a little bit more bite, a little bit more credibility perhaps to this push. Still Nazgul in here as well, 6 of them, but I would assume they're pretty damaged. 3 of them have died after all. Balagaya archers, I mean, if they still have ammunition at this point in any of their archers, it's time to start dumping it if you are the defenders. Numenorian cohort shield guard moving over here, perhaps seeing the danger that this now represents. Guardians of Cardolan a little bit depleted. Hiri Pang can look after themselves in melee, of course. Heavy elven archers have a tendency of doing that. Still, all of these missiles are coming forward, and you have to say, the lack of archers has not really hurt the attackers here because they've had more to commit to these front lines. Throwing axes being utilised on, I think, Numenorian cohort. From the front, they'll actually be pretty solid. If they're going after the Isengard Ballista, I think it's a bit late for that. They need to be going after the infantry, which is threatening to overrun them. This pocket of elven resistance will be brought down low. There's still a Troll of Gondor, which I'm really surprised about, but surely not for too much longer, being all up in the elves' business. The mounted Numenorian divisions getting in and amongst those Scourge Raiders. Numenorians, of course, famously weren't that big a fan of cavalry. But here, it might be the saving grace if they can get some telling charges as more Numenorian infantry does arrive. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr are very depleted at this point, but the Gundabad Guard have pushed their way through the lines very adeptly. And now they're going to be able to surround these Numenorians as well. Do they have anything left in reserve? Not really. I mean, archers when they run out of ammunition perhaps, but they need to use their ammo first. Could be useful that they still do have ammo though. Meanwhile, down here in the pits, Numenor are going to win this fight. The Witcher-on Pikemen and the Gundabad Guard with the Dunlanders not going to be enough to prevent the Numenor quality, but the Witcher-on Pikemen being there means this front line will continue for a little while yet. And that's really the important thing. Over here, how are things going for Mordor? They've managed to get some Orc Javelins in behind enemy lines, so I think with a lot of these front lines showing this much wear and tear, the attackers are onto a winner, and it could be the defenders didn't react quickly enough when they saw the big assault incoming. When you're facing Orc armies like this, you always have to be prepared for the fact that you could be facing one giant assault at any moment, and you need to be ready to reinforce your front lines if that's the case. And I'm not sure the defenders were ready for that on this occasion. And with Orc Javelins in behind the lines as well, throwing their javelins into the side of this line, they're going to be able to burn down the Pharazim Swordmasters with that. They're going to need to send a unit of infantry to intercept this unit of Orc Javelins. If they don't, it's going to be a disaster in the making. That's too much damage for the Pharazim Swordmasters. I mean, they're not dying for the moment, but it's going to be enough to cause them a problem. They're trying to break the Orcs on the front line, which some of the more basic units they could be able to. Isengard are coming forward now as well to help reinforce unit of Uruk-hai infantry to help this assault, as well as a unit of Isengard pikemen. It's not looking great for the defenders, you have to say. They were caught off guard by a very large assault, and I'm not sure whether they're going to be able to recover. Elven King's Palace Guard, 3 of them remain. Going to be able to kill off that one pike. Tried to parry one-handed with his pike then. The joys of Medieval 2's animations. But yeah, over here, Hiri Pang at this point are having to hold the front line on their lonesome. They probably do okay against Gundabad Guard in a vacuum, but it's cost the attackers this, but they still have a cohesive army. More importantly, they do still have their preserved Witcher-on Blackguard. They're getting shot, but that won't bother them too much. That cavalry is going to really need to do the business, but yeah, certainly a depleted force from the attackers, but they will gain a narrow victory there. So it becomes even more important. This is interesting. They're actually pushing through, and as a result, panicking this front line a little bit. Belagaea footmen not enjoying the Gundabad Guard getting all up in their business like this. And at this stage, it's not looking like the defenders are going to win any front line. Have they intercepted those Orc Javelins yet? Doesn't look like they have. Or maybe they did, I'm not sure. To be fair, this front line is still going okay. Now that the Javelins have been thwarted, or moved somewhere perhaps. Point blank support as well coming in from the Belagaea archers and the Elders of the Elven King. But I'm not sure, I don't know if this is going to be enough for the defenders, although to be fair that was a rout from something. Depleted morale on infantry, but that is a sign that things are moving in the right direction for them. Numenorians trying to push forwards. Meanwhile, some Nazkai are in here. That's a bad sign. They need the support these Belagaea archers can offer with their bows. If they're being chopped away by these Nazkai. Nazkai doing so much damage they're causing. I think that is it. Like, it's only really units of really high damage that tend to cause that bug, where the unit models go absolutely crazy and then 2D T-pose into the ground. It's a really weird death animation and death bug. So no, those Orc Javelins were not dead. They simply came around over here, and now they're going to surround this front line. So again, really good use of the Orc Javelins, I think, on this occasion from Rhun. Definitely a worthwhile endeavour to bring so many of them. And you can scarcely go wrong with them. That's why you should always be bringing them as Mordor, regardless of the situation, I think. You don't have to, but it's very rare that they're not useful. The catapult now, before using anywhere near enough of its ammunition, has been caught out by some Angmar pikes. Yeah, I think we know which way the winds are blowing, and I think it's going to be an attacker victory here. I think that is the Mordor general, though. That is the Temple Executioners, and that was Pharazim's sword masters he was facing. So victory. Those Uruk-hai Berserkers looking a little bit bloodied up, which means they won't last for too much longer in melee. Belagair archers are trying to get behind, I think, the Elders of the Elven King, knowing that they are a little bit more up to the task, maybe, of trying to take on a unit as scary as the Nazkai. But even over here at this point, without the ranged attack, or ranged support, it's not looking good. Those pikes, able to pin them in place, and the Temple Executioners shimmying around the side. They will do the business. Where did that ballista go, I wonder? Do they wheel it across? Not entirely sure. Nara and Iron Royal Guard are backed up against the cliff wall at this point. They will stay alive for a while, but they won't do the damage necessary to turn this fight around, I don't think. And there are Witch-Realm Blackguard as well. They have taken damage, actually. And this is the thing, the attackers will take serious damage through all of the choke points, but they will get varying degrees of victory across all three of them. Which is not what you want to be seeing if you're the defenders. But to be fair, like I said, when one choke point falls on this map, the other two are pretty much destined to follow. Nazkai defeat is almost a certainty. I think they took a point-blank volley there from the Elders of the Elven King, but at this point they're going to need to draw their swords and actually answer the challenge of the Nazkai. The Belagair archers will continue to fire over their heads and continue to do damage to the Uruk-hai pikemen. That could be the Angmar general that just fell. I think it could also have been the Numenor general over here that fell. It's kind of difficult to tell. Yeah, the Pharazim Swordmaster. At this point, range support or no, there's simply too many orcs and Uruk-hai. Those Temple Executioners, depleted though they may be, will also offer a little bit of support to the Nazkai. Or are they going to turn around again and try and deal with the Pharazim? Muddied and bloodied as they may be. Yeah, and victory really across all the other choke points means they're going to converge on the Elders of the Elven King and Belagair archers. This unit of Nara and Iron Royal Guard will live for quite a while. If something like the Nazkai were over here, maybe it'd be different, but most of the units facing them are pikes that will kill them very, very slowly. Which one pikeman victorious over there. Ooh. And to add insult to injury, I'm not actually sure, that could have been the Isengard Giant, but I think it was Thranduil. We'll be able to tell because Thranduil himself will be crispy. No, Thranduil is there, so it was actually the Isengard General. Unfortunate bit of friendly fire that, but I mean at this point you're just hastening the demise. Oof. Yeah, you're getting quite a lot of friendly fire there. The danger of the Isengard Ballista with its extra thick projectiles. The Belagair archers continuing to fire. They'll do decently against those Uruk-hai Berserkers, but a good assault this. They just went all in and the defenders were not prepared to deal with that. They didn't reinforce their lines quickly enough. They tried to get away with being a bit stingy on their front lines from the outset, and their reinforcements were too far away. Belagair archers end up routing as a result of the ballista fire, and they will rout directly into the advancing units. Scourge Raiders back over there as well. Elders of the Elven King will continue to charge forwards into the Berserkers. There's still 21 of them, not an insubstantial amount. And not exactly the kind of target that the Berserkers enjoy facing. Meanwhile, Nara and Iron Royal Guard, backs to the wall style. continuing to take damage, but we will smash the enemy. Yeah, and it's a significant victory. Yeah, just over the 10% mark, 13%, but that's more because when one of the choke points fell, the lead of the attackers started to grow, as you would expect. They took damage, it definitely cost them, but it's the kind of battle that, as the attackers, you have to be pleased. It's a textbook way to play the orcs, and the elves and the Numenorians were not prepared to deal with the onslaught. But perhaps newer players, they'll learn in time, I'm sure. Let's see. It's the end of the Royal Guard. So perhaps unsurprisingly, the Elders of the Elven King will be the last ones left standing. In pure melee terms, the Berserkers, they'll do damage, but they'll also take a lot of damage. There are a few Temple Executioners in here as well. The announcer interrupting himself. Incredible scenes. Do they still have Pharazim nobles, or were they dealt with at some point? Did they stray into pikes, perhaps? It's quite possible. The ballista being abandoned, the crew making their way over here. The halls themselves didn't see battle. Quite a few frames left, considering it's just 12 Elders of the Elven King. Maybe the Pharazim nobles are still lurking around somewhere. Irregardless of that, Mirkwood will fight to the bitter end for their home. Thranduil himself, with his backwards grip on his swords, getting horribly bloodied up by a clutch of berserkers. Running someone through with the hilt of the sword. How violent. Victory a distinct possibility. Elders of the Elven King. The Ballista crew. Interesting that the Ballista crew are coming over here. Snaga are in there still. Some surviving Isengard Snaga. Nothing over on that side of the field. I'm curious, because I never saw what happened to the Pharazim nobles. Maybe there's a pile of their bodies over here. They were charging around over here after all, trying to stem the bleeding of this front line, but it never truly worked, and that may be because there were pikes and spears involved. And there were only so many Pharazim knights. Victory seems certain for the Elders of the Elven King. Are you quite sure? I don't think so. They're strong, but they're not that strong. Not even the Nazgul could fight their way out of this one. Maybe the Witchers or the Iron Watch could with some point-blank fire through the infantry, but that's a different thing. That's not really melee prowess now, is it? Victory seems certain now for the Orcs. A few Blackguard left, 35 Blackguard, 9 Temple Executioners, but this is pretty much the sum total of the attacking army, considering the large Orc force it was before. It's a substantial amount, but it's not an overwhelming amount. It was still a competitive battle, for sure. And it's good to see Thranduil's halls again. Obviously this will be the last time for quite a while that we see Thranduil's halls, but still. Still a fair few pikes left, which is quite telling, I think. It tells me that they committed their pikes at the right time to really consolidate their gains and make it very, very difficult for the defenders to recover from the situation that they were in once the initial assault had struck. 19 Uruk-hai pikemen. Still Berserkers left as well, which is rare. Usually Berserkers fizzle out at some stage in a battle. Oh, there goes Thranduil. I was about to say, he's still alive, isn't he? Well, not anymore. Surrounded by actually lower-end skirmishers that eventually chipped him down. I think this one's probably going to be the last one. Nope, they routed. So they are not locked morale, and Thranduil's loss causes them to run. And victory it shall be for the attackers, and a good victory it was as well. The defenders put up a good fight, but ultimately they didn't have their reinforcements close enough to their lines when the big assault really came. And based on the amount of frames in the battle, I kind of thought this is where this fight was going to go. Either when the big assault came, I just wondered whether the attackers would be able to make it stick or not, and they did. So fair play to them. See what did the damage for Joran's army. I think he was the most effective of the attackers because he was the first one in. He got the most kills, which isn't always a indicator of being the best player. But on this occasion, I think the way that he handled his army was pretty good. Angmar and Isengard as well just followed through on that assault, and everything was golden. Nazgul did well. They were fighting for a long time on that front line. It looked like they were initially going to actually get focused down, but wasn't the case in the end, which was good for Mordor because that allowed them to rack up some good kills. The Oleg High did well on that front line, relatively speaking. 123 kills might seem just okay for a unit as expensive as the Oleg High, but considering the units they were up against, they actually did very well, and they lasted for longer than I thought they might. Temple Executioners as well were in a situation where they were taking ranged fire, and there was pikes all over the place, and Pharazim sword masters eventually, but they were still just about standing at the end, which says a lot. But I think the most impressive unit for Mordor, even though they didn't get that many kills as such, I think the use of the Orc Javelins was really, really good from Mordor, and the use actually of the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. His army is very structured, as you can see. He knew exactly how he wanted to use each of his unit types, and he used them all very, very well. The Morannon infantry really were just the chaff. Interesting to see a Mordor army as well without a single unit of Orc fodder. You know, they're so cheap that you very often see the Orc fodder just to make up the numbers, but not the case here. Joran did not feel the need to do so, and it paid off for him, you'd have to say. Good use of all of his units, certainly. And kind of the distribution you'd expect based on quality as well, except maybe the Minas Morgul Chosen. You'd often expect them to get over that amount of kills, but they were the first ones in, to be fair, and their whole purpose is more to stay alive for a long enough period of time to keep the attack going, rather than actually get kills. In a siege, anyway. That's how the Minas Morgul Chosen are often used and should be used. But yeah, big thank you to Joran for sending this one to me, and big thank you to all of the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. It's good to see Thranduil's halls again. As I said in the last battle replay, I think I probably already would have come out with a channel update at this point, and well, probably a channel update will be coming towards the end of February. I think that's going to be how we handle business, and so it should have already happened. From my perspective, I know what's happening. I just don't know exactly when it's happening. But suffice it to say, I know, and you should have known at this point as well, that it will be the earlier of the options when my channel will be changing. So I'm sure some people will be a little bit disappointed with that, considering that the changes are being phased in are a slight reduction in the amount of content that I can actually put out. But it was always going to happen at some point, so I may as well rip that band-aid off. And yes, indeed, things will be moving forwards apace. Now, at this point, I'm recording quite a lot in a row here because I want to build up a really sort of big backlog, essentially, of replays that I've already got uploaded to YouTube, so that when I do have to go through the process of relocating and upheaval, that this will sort of continue and tick over without any sort of input from me while I get established, and then I can pick it up again once everything is back and we're rolling. That's the idea anyway. So I am recording quite a long way in advance, and at this point I am actually running low on the replays I can do, which are newer maps and interesting maps and stuff that I would feel like it's worth showing. There are a few maps like the Grey Havens and Umbar and so on, which I do have, which I'm sure are decent battles, but we've seen them too recently, especially Umbar, that I can't really show them. Regardless of that, that is the sort of... So I will be looking for more replays in the interim, as we are in February. So hopefully I do get a few more and I can keep building that backlog as much as I can before I do move. And hopefully a kind of goal could be to have 2 months worth of content already uploaded and done. And then, you know, that'll give me plenty of wiggle room for re-establishing myself and getting the content on a timetable which is a little bit more doable. But yeah, that is the situation as it stands from my perspective. From your perspective, this probably would have already worked itself out, because probably midway through March is when this replay will be dropping. So that's something. But yeah, it's all go at this point in time. So yeah, it's going to be quite interesting. Future of the channel, obviously, I want to keep it going as best as I can. I don't believe it will be impossible to keep my channel going. That's the thing. Like I think that, you know, 2 replays a week or 2 bits of content a week is definitely doable. So that's what I will be gunning for. Either way, there could be some variability with that. I can't say for sure that it's going to be fully doable. Even in my update, I'm sure that I won't be able to say that because I won't have actually started yet. But based on the scheduling, I've had a look, and I think it'll be fine to do 2 replays a week fairly comfortably. Occasionally, filtering in a third piece of content as well, which will probably take the form of, how that'll probably work will be 2 battle replays a week, and occasionally where I can we'll filter in a part of our DAC campaigns as well. Streaming though is likely to be extremely difficult, unless I'm on like vacation or something. I don't think streaming is going to be all that viable based on the amount of moving around that I will have to be doing. But this is the sort of thing which we can hammer out when I'm actually a little bit more aware of what it is the scheduling is going to be like and when I've actually experienced it. Regardless of that, it's kind of by the by, really. But yeah, I'm sure that'll be gone through in a channel update in the future. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.